At the Festivus dinner, you gather your family around and tell them all the ways they have disappointed you over the past year. That and more this week on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And that's it. It's the third annual Dynasty Festivus. Who has disappointed us? So we're going to shout out to one of our favorite shows for quotable moments in Seinfeld throughout. But Jordan, where would you like to start in all the ways Dynasty, NFL, and certain players and situations have disappointed us this year?
Russell Wilson, I think the biggest one for me, just didn't see this complete fall off, and this is just, I thought a lot of it was just like sort of some narrative stuff to begin with. Like you could look at the metrics and be like, they're not actually that bad. Some of it's, worse than it seems, but it's completely fallen apart. And, it's tough to trust him in a game. It's tough to trust him to put him in a lineup right now. And you get in a spot where, if he's your quarterback too, are you flexing a different position into that and super flex, and that's never a great place to be. That's not anywhere, we thought he had, top 6 upside this year, not, bottom, outside the top 25 in given weeks, right? That's very different. So yeah, that's been probably the biggest one I would say for me this year.
Yeah, I was thinking back. I while you were talking about the Broncos, I certainly wrote them down. Russell Wilson at the point man for that offense. I was almost thinking the AFC West in general, right? I mean, we talked about best division in football. What's going to happen? Chiefs are in trouble. Chiefs versus the field. Well, we're seeing how that's going. I mean, the Chargers and Justin Herbert, again, pro Justin Herbert room right here, but taking a step back, not a step forward. But the Raiders, they're supposed to challenge getting Javonte Adams, and especially if you had told us in advance what Josh Jacobs was going to do, I mean, we'd be like potential bye week, challenging for one of the top seeds in the AFC, nowhere close. And I do want to mention with the Broncos, with the head coach firing, I do wonder that if this is a situation where it's a mini version of the Jaguars last year, of saying, are all these components really that bad? Or was there something macro going on? Because think about this. I mean, we can talk just on the player level. Javonte Williams was going to be a major part of their plans. Melvin Gordon was another part of that backfield who's no longer on the team. Jerry Jeudy has missed time. Cortland Sutton has missed time. Greg Dulcich, who was lighting things up July, August, didn't get going until mid-season. Albert O has been a non-factor after being promising a year ago. KJ Hamler, checks watch. Yep, still on the not going to do anything ever path. So
Tim Patrick.
That's a lot, right? And Tim Patrick being lost. All of that happened on one offense. Russell Wilson, the biggest thing that you can say, the biggest macro is low touchdown rate. And with all the things I just said, and if the coach, offense, things are a little haywire, that would be the first thing to go. The big plays, the red zone execution. And so I have a hard time believing that for a decade plus, everything was telling us Russell Wilson is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And I have a hard time thinking in a matter of 12 months, he went from that to he's one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. And you told me he's not 40 years old. I have a hard time putting those things together. And what did we also put together? We put together bad seasons with a number of other veteran quarterbacks from time to time. We saw the head coach, who was already questioned early in the year, get fired before the season is done, which is not super common. So you put all those things together. I get why it's disappointed. I'm pretty excited about some of these veterans at the quarterback position. Russell Wilson with a QB 20 with a line under it, somewhere in there for startup drafts or trade valuations in the offseason. We have a trade involving Russell Wilson to discuss on this show. Pretty excited about Russell Wilson. Not, obviously the tough hold. You're sitting there. You had him as part of your plans. That stinks. But in terms of going forward and saying, I think things are going to be better. He might never be QB5 in a season, but I think things are going to be far better than they are now. And typically with these profiles, you look back, and that was the blip season, not the beginning of the end.
Especially at his age, right? I think you kind of hit that right. When it's not 40, right? That looks more like a blip. I think you're right on that. Yeah, I mean, I actually think you hit this on the head in terms of like longer term dynasty stuff. This could be an all timer in terms of in the Superflex era of dynasty, right? Superflex hasn't been the predominant format for that long, right? 5-6 years, it's something in that range. I don't remember that there being sort of the values at quarterback that I think are going to be present in terms of where some of these guys are going to slot into the position. Russell Wilson, Stafford, where does a guy like Deshaun Watson end up falling, right? There's a chance that Prescott slips, right? There's a lot of these guys that are going to, I mean, Kyler Murray, where does Lamar Jackson go, right? You sort of look at all of these and you could say, like, there's going to be some funky market stuff happening that I think I'm going to spend a lot of my January focusing on that, right? Focusing on, where their deals present and sort of combing through all of my leagues and doing that. I think you hit that right on the head.
This holiday season, a donation has been made in your name to the Children's Alliance. I also wanted to mention the Rams.
Well, is it the World Fund?
What's that?
The Earth Fund? What was that?
Was the Human Fund.
The Human Fund.
The first one that George got upset about was the Children's Alliance. And he's like, what is this? And then he came up with postcards that said the Human Fund. He's like, whatever. I'm gonna say the Rams. Let's talk. We can talk injuries. We can talk what happened before that. But when you take out the QB1, obviously Baker Mayfield, he's trying to reclaim his career. There's some good vibes going on now. But you have Matthew Stafford, who is already having his worst season. You take out Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson. They had big plans for him. That went the wayside, and a lot of the reporting, Jordan Rodriguez and others, that offensive line was a major component of that. Not being able to protect the quarterback that, frankly, a mid-30s Matthew Stafford needs protecting. And to get vertical routes to Allen Robinson, maybe a little Van Jefferson, Tutu Atwell, complementing what Cooper Kupp was doing. All those things had to come together in the perfect storm, and you got the most imperfect storm. Stafford's another one. Allen Robinson, I have a hard time just completely writing you off because, again, part of a haywire season. It went haywire for the Rams. It went so haywire that the running back who they didn't want to put on the field to be traded is now their lead running back, putting up big production in the fantasy playoffs. What world is this? And I'll just say for everyone that was trumpeting Kieran Williams, oh, this guy's coming in. Watch this. Coming in hot. Going to take jobs. Guys, go sit over there to the guy that they didn't want to be around.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think the Rams are another one where you say everything went wrong. And these offenses where you say big plans, big projections, and all of a sudden there's big downside because one thing after another will be the 2022 storyline here.
Yeah. It's interesting because like another quarterback profile was Stafford, right? And I don't know if he said this. I don't know if he said this before our show last week, but he went on his wife's podcast and said that he's coming back. He's not retiring. So for what that's worth, I thought that was a notable thing. And again, he's one of those guys in the quarterback room. The thing about the Rams that I have the question is like we got totally hoodwinked on Allen Robinson. Right? Everyone was talking about how right he could have pulled down a first, right? I mean, he was like it was crazy narratives about him, and it was totally not true. Like almost Dante Pettis level of not true about the narratives that were going on. And it's really, I don't know about, like, I don't have a good comp and you have a good set of historical comps. You're the comp guy. What do you have for a comp of someone that's basically fallen off in their later 20s for 2 straight years? I mean, that can't have a good history of rebounding to fantasy success. So that's the concern that I have with Robinson. Last year, we could have said, hey, this maybe is a little Harden playing his way out of Houston type deal with Chicago. But then he comes in and just totally face plants this year. And that gives me a lot of pause about him because there's not a ton of guys where that happens. I think contractually they are kind of stuck with him next year. But look, I don't know if there's a great sort of case to be made for him to bounce back historically.
Well, sir, I gave out the fake card because I don't really celebrate Christmas. I celebrate Festivus. Yeah, I agree with you that the comps are not good. The comps basically say at this point in your career, being off the radar for this amount of time and to such a graphic nature, even for 1 year, typically, that you will not come back. Point blank, period, in stop. Here's the other statement that I think applies for Allen Robinson going forward. And frankly, Allen Robinson back in August. It would have been, you have to be hyper careful with investing or meaningful mental, emotional, and dynasty capital into wide receiver twos. He's a wide receiver two. He wasn't going to pass Cooper Kupp. And then you say, are the Rams going to be dominant to such a level that the wide receiver two is going to hyper matter? That's the critical question. And a lot of times it can be easy to lose sight of that. Easy to say. And again, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle is a good example. There are examples where it could happen, but let's not pretend that those two duos are the same. There's a big difference there. So you have to be really careful about anointing two top guys. And for Allen Robinson, the price, as you mentioned, got to a point where it was going to be just absorbently unlikely that he hits the price point he needs for what his market was and for what expectations were at his age. Haven't seen it in a while, and expecting, that's another thing, right? Expecting the turnaround, and not just expecting a turnaround. Having a guy, again, the concern is he played. He didn't miss 2 straight years like Michael Thomas. I did not play. I choose not to run. It wasn't that situation. So that's different than saying you played, you're going to blame it on a stinky situation, you're going to blame it on everything else and say it wasn't me and I'm going somewhere else and things are going to be rapidly different. That to me is a very dangerous scenario. I'm going to say for the running back position, DeAndre Swift. Really disappointing because, I mean, we're talking about a guy that we know and still has running back one within his range of outcomes. He can, I mean, catching 4 or 5 plus balls a week is the fast track to get there. You can't, it's really tough to predict touchdowns other than Derrick Henry, maybe Nick Chubb, maybe a few other players that we feel pretty good about within, you know, a medium to higher level for NFL. But everyone else is subject to change. And DeAndre Swift, how about this? I mean, there were weeks he was literally running as the number 3 or 4 guy on his own depth chart. When you look at snaps, Jordan, it hurt my soul looking on Mondays and Tuesdays for these snaps because I was like, he didn't play. I still say this. If a guy with his level of ability looks like he's just off the map for 6 weeks, he has to be playing hurt. He has to be, because I've learned this lesson too many times. And he might come out, we might find out in January that he was playing through something. We found out, right? I mean, Zeke was playing through more than he let on last year. So that's typically the answer. Jamal Williams, hey, we prefer him at the goal line. Okay, I get that. But Swift we saw these pockets of, oh, there he is. And then a month of, there he isn't. That's got to be, it's super frustrating for DeAndre Swift, for his teams with having much greater expectations, because he was one that, like I said, I mean, he was in the rotation behind Justin Jackson, for goodness sake. I mean, we were just pleased. Can he get the ball? He's running back 29 on a per game. I mean, he's way down the dial in points per game. I mean, it was unbelievable. We're not talking just a split with Jamal Williams. It turned into a 3 and 4 headed committee at times.
Yeah, not great. Some other honorable mentions at running back I would throw in: AJ Dillon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire have both let us down. I actually went out and I combed I put this out to the Twitter sphere, and I just put out a tweet, and we got some responses here. Let me see what your thoughts are on some of these. Justin Herbert, Mark Andrews, Mike Evans. There's some, you know, the bunch of the teams were the NFC South in particular. Kyle Pitts was an interesting one. Someone putting out Josh Allen. I can't get on board with that as being a letdown, considering he's going to be quarterback 1 for the 3rd consecutive year.
Right.
Leonard Fournette, who paid off in just gold this week. JT, Swift, Gibson, there's another one. Pitts, another name popping up. Dylan, Wilson, Deontay Johnson, who's, by the way, on pace to have the most receptions for anyone without a touchdown. He's going to break a long record there. Allen Robinson popping up. DJ Moore, Cortland Sutton, and Brandon Cooks. So some good names in there.
Yeah, let me derail one thing, because I was going to say, is Kyle Pitts a disappointment? Just to poke bears here. So we are talking, just to put it in perspective, a second year tight end. I mean, the expectations put upon Mr. Kyle Pitts were insanely high at a position that is insanely hard. And I can make the argument he's playing wide receiver, but I would still say being a hybrid player and trying to play wide receiver in your second year in the NFL is a tough ask. So I wonder, in retrospect, can he, I mean, not to finish in the tight end 20s or whatever, but to say that he's going to go through some growing pains and that defenses are going to go into Atlanta and have a better plan than week 3 of 2021 when he was just coming in, I think it's reasonable to say they're going to have a better game plan. And now what they always say is, right, you can flash, you can be a phenom a little bit, then you're going to get punched in the face. And now year 3, it's kind of like with quarterbacks. Now year 3 is you punch back. Or the pivot is, how are you going to adapt to the adaptation that they did to you? That's it. And I think Pitts playing wide receiver largely is part of that. Like, yeah, you're such a unicorn. You're basically a wide receiver. Congratulations. You still got to post. You still got to post big numbers. I don't care what position you play. I don't care where you line in the. What do we care? Catch some balls. Catch some touchdowns. He's yet to do that. And now you got Drake London there. What if Drake London's better? I said it. What if Drake London's better?
I mean, it's possible.
He's played wide receiver a heck of a lot longer.
Right. If that's how you're going to play Pitts. If that's how you're going to play Pitts.
Just,
you know what?
I just wonder if expectations were too high. People spouting that he's a disappointment. Well, that's because you expected him to be tight end 1.
Right.
How many points per game off is he from tight end 6? We know it's flat.
Right.
So
it doesn't matter from 5 to.
But what I'm saying is, if the difference was, okay, I don't want to sound horrible, but for saying it, but let me actually say, so he's 7.6 versus, so if he was 3 points per game better, 1 catch a game, 1 catch for 15 yards, basically, and he was tight end 9, would people be saying Kyle Pitts? Probably not. That's what we're talking about.
And the fact that he's hurt, right? I mean, the fact that he's missed time, I think that's probably a.
Well, guess what? It's better that he's hurt. Let's be fair, right? Sorry, Joe. Right. It's better that he's hurt because he was killing people in their lineup.
Right.
People were going up against Travis Kelce, going do even game, head to head. I lose by 20. So. I mean, I think it's better that you moved on to the Juwan Johnsons of the world. Let's be fair. Brass tacks.
Yeah. Tyler Higbee.
I do want to tell you a quick story, though. Many Christmases ago, I went to buy a doll for my son. I reached up for the last one they had, but so did another man. As I rained blows upon him, I realized there had to be another way. #Festivus.
So good. Hey, by the way, how about Atlanta as a landing spot for a quarterback? Right. So right now they're slotted to pick 6th. They're 5-10. So if they lose twice, there's a bunch of teams that are 4-11. Denver, Arizona, and then you have Indy, and actually Atlanta would lose a tiebreaker to them and pick higher, I guess. The point is they're going to be in the zone. Yeah. Right. Well, they could pick 2. Right. Them picking 2 is still in the range of outcomes. And they have like a terrible strength of schedule, which is actually the tiebreaker. So they're going to win almost any tiebreaker for picks in that range. If they lose a couple more games, like this could be a team that all of a sudden is looking at a top 3 pick at quarterback. And you have a guy with, you've got Kyle Pitts, right? You've got Drake London. Tyler Allgeier's been okay, and then you put a quarterback in there in a good system, right? They have, they're going to have the ability coming off some of these contracts to really reset the payroll and do some things like that. All of a sudden, like this could be a team in a division that's horrible. This could be a team that all of a sudden could go from worst to first in this division. A lot of the things that we thought that maybe Jacksonville could have done last year, right? I think this team very much has that in their potential range of outcomes, given what they have as a support system for a good quarterback coming in. So I think it's a really interesting landing spot for them, and I think better than Houston, right? It's better than a couple of the other spots up there they could potentially pick.
I'm gonna pour one out for Mike Evans's touchdowns this year.
Yeah,
I mean, he's closing in on 1,000 yards. We talk about how unbelievably consistent he's been in terms of just his relevancy of role and the big plays, the touchdowns. All that has been there. I think there was a tweet, I can't reference it offhand, but that he has the most fantasy points taken off the board by penalty this year. And the long touchdowns, there's a couple of them that I can remember. The big plays, again, and he's got 3 scores. We're talking about a guy that over the past 2 seasons, 27, 13 and 14 respectively. So this is arguably over the past 4 or 5 years and easily over the last 8, the touchdown machine. It was like Gronkowski. You put 3 tier lines, and then you have some wide receivers. And Mike Evans was one of those wide receivers. And to have 3 on 67 catches, I mean, again, last time he posted 3 was in 2015, that low, and then he comes right back to 12. So he is going to be one. He's outside the top 30 on a per game basis. With Tom Brady, they're throwing the ball a ton. He's had some taken off the board, a lot of bad puck luck. And just, that is one that definitely is going to get me. When you look back and you look back at the aggregate of a career arc, missed opportunities, things like that, just the perfect storm, confluence of factors. Mike Evans' touchdowns this year.
Yeah, and you just go back and you look at some of the stuff like his expectation, how he's performed basically against it over the past 3 years. And like he has had a pretty good expectation and has overperformed it. 2020, he was expected for 10.8 touchdowns, had 13. Last year, expected for 8.6, had 14. Right? How does that fall this year? Well, significantly on the other side. Has 6.5, again, still has time. He could get to 8.6 is what he had last year, but just on the total flip side of it, right? I mean, just on the bad side of variance, he has 3 instead of 14, right? That's totally the difference. Actually, when you looked at it, someone pointed this out on Twitter. I don't remember exactly who it was, but when you look at it on a per game basis, more receptions than the past 2 years, more yards per game than the past 2 years, like more targets than the past 2 years. So he's on pace to have more targets than he's had in any year since 2018. So when you sort of look at that, right, it's actually bad puck luck, right? Like the term you like to use. It's a lot more of that than I think any sort of him falling off, right? I think it's an interesting situation. He's going to be one of those guys that's a pretty good buy. Like there's going to be a lot of profile buys in this offseason. He's going to be one that's certainly there.
Yeah, pretty glaring because you keep doubling down, you keep investing because the price keeps falling on these profiles as they get to 28, 29, especially 30 plus years old, as Mike Evans will be in the off season. And certainly one of the most historically productive wide receivers for his age and career arc that we go through. Want to remind you about the Football Guys membership options, subscriptions, especially if you maybe poked around, you've been listening to this show, you've heard us talk about the content. Just know, used to have a cycle where you're pretty much signing up in the spring/summer. You're getting membership through the end of the year. Now it's a rolling 12 months. It's a very common membership pattern and period, so that you're going to get the Dynasty content. We have a lot more Devy content, NFL draft content that you're going to get. And again, it's a rolling 12 months. So if you sign up in January, sign up in February, sign up this week, you could still get content for week 17, but the rolling 12 months of content through the offseason and including the 2023 season. So all of that information, we talk about Gene Bramwell all the time, the good guy, good doctor. The IDP coverage, I will say, because I lean on IDP coverage. I am not naturally an IDP analyst or expert, but I pose as one in my dynasty leagues. And frankly, I do really well and frankly better in my IDP leagues than my other ones, just because Football Guys provide such a tactical advantage. So the more formats change, the more you mix in new tools and new twists to scoring. That's when you need Football Guys. You need all the tools, the league dominator. You need the projections, and with IDP, they have added to their IDP content. I feel like they have the strongest projections out there in the industry, and there's no one else I trust more. So again, Dynasty, you need to have every single advantage, and whether that's offense, defense, special teams. Sometimes you're drafting head coaches. So again, 12-month membership. You want to go over, give us some credit. Tell them you came from the Dynasty show, which is footballguys.com/dynasty winners.
It's time for the Stash of the Week, powered by Sleeper.
Powered by Sleeper, and we're going to highlight a running back situation. And frankly, these are the types of analyses you need to do when you're looking at depth charts around the NFL. You need to look at free agency. You need to look at possible cap casualties. We see them on an annual basis, ones that you may not see coming in October, November. You're setting lineups. You don't really care. Feed me that production, Seymour. Well, I want to point out Hassan Haskins. Tennessee is an interesting situation. Ryan Tannehill, what are they going to do there? Derrick Henry is going to be 29 years old soon, very early in the offseason. He's had a lot of tread taken off that tire as a power back. We've seen it slip just a little bit this year. They might be looking to turn the page. They might be saying, I don't know if this is, we should keep going down Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, power run game. Everything runs off of that. You have Dontrell Hilliard, a free agent. Hassan Haskins has 4th round pedigree, good enough to say he's got a shot. He's got a shot. And even if he's not the absolute lead back from now all the way, from some point in the offseason all the way through to week 1, he has a really good chance to be the primary backup. That pedigree, you've pretty much got to fall off and be a complete disappointment. He's missed a little bit of time with injury, but I've also seen him being played on passing downs with Dontrell Hilliard being out. So there's some positives here to close the year, a pretty interesting depth chart. And Derrick Henry's salary balloons to $15 million. They could move on and save $7-8 million. This is in play for a 29-year-old set to be paid $15 million. Could they restructure? But the point is, there are moving pieces here, and this is the kind of tertiary view you have to take sometimes to what's the storyline to get to where I need to go with finding good sleepers on the back end of my depth chart.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. I can't even add anything. My question just for you about Tennessee, would you go this is going to be basically the last year of Tannehill, right? So he's on the hook. They're on the hook for basically $27 million in salary and base salary next year. They could basically save his cap number is like $36.6 million. They could basically save half of that by cutting him. They could play out the deal and just just let it play out and see where that takes them, right? I don't know if they want to do that financially. Like they're over the cap already with only, with like 42 guys on their roster. So that they're probably going to look for there at some point to make some savings. We got to make a decision one way or another. What do you do with Tannehill, right? Like he's going to be 35 next year. Feels like a young 35 considering, hasn't started, for the average 35-year-old hasn't started that many games. But you feel like somewhere in the middle of the road of the quarterback starters in the league. I find him to be fascinating, right? I find him, Goff, Geno Smith, right? Sort of that tranche of the quarterback position be super interesting. Like you said, like it has implications for what they think about Henry. Like if you're going to not bring back Tannehill, do you sort of move on from Henry as well? I just think it's a really fascinating question. I think we're going to get a lot of quarterback decisions this year that we can learn from.
And look at the division. You've got Trevor Lawrence taking a step forward, Jags rising. You're going to get Houston, who's been a live dog this year, but they're going to have a look at probably the 101 and any quarterback of their choosing. And Tennessee might say, well, we're actually behind the 8 ball of restarting this process. If Malik Willis isn't our answer, where are we going? Are we getting a bridge guy? Like you mentioned with Tannehill, how long are we going to go down this? I think Tennessee has a lot of soul searching and mirror facing, this off season to say, where are we going, doubling down or maybe taking that away and going in a different direction.
And they could
talk-
like one team that we also talked about here, like they could find themselves very much in an Atlanta situation, right? Like they kick the can on Tannehill, they kick the can on Derrick Henry to sort of smooth it out, and then all of a sudden they got to pay the piper, and it's like, all right, we're paying a ton of money in dead cap to two guys that aren't here anymore and not helping us, and we're really bad and don't have an answer at quarterback, right? They could sort of be in the Atlanta space and honestly be even worse than Atlanta because they don't have answers at skill positions right now. So I think it's an interesting, but they have a defense that can win. It's a really fascinating question what they're going to do.
Stop crying and fight your father. Moving on to dynasty trades this week, and as mentioned at the top, we've got Russell Wilson. A Russell Wilson trade this week amidst he's about ready to beat the bathrooms. He's about ready to beat his own bathrooms with touchdowns. We'll see. Fingers crossed. It took a while. Big journey. We have 12-team Superflex, 207, 208, Mike White, and Brock Purdy for Russell Wilson and Jerry Jeudy.
You could almost do this deal for just Jeudy.
That was going to be my lead question, defense attorney. It was going to be, is this appropriate for Jerry Jeudy?
Is this free Wilson? Right? Is that actually free Wilson? Was kind of the, and I'm not a huge.
I was going to say, how much
fan.
of this is for Jerry Jeudy? Certainly the 2 seconds, right?
Right. Yeah.
We haven't had a official Brock Purdy discussion. I do think we should. I do think in the next couple of weeks, let's have one when we get a few more games. Let's see how this goes. We'll dive into Brock Purdy. Don't worry, we've got time. And then Mike White.
I mean, what's the? I mean, I don't think either of those two guys are long-term starters, right? And I think you're basically making a bet here, and this is a great way to make a Wilson bet. Honestly, like you're trading 4 things that probably aren't going to help you long-term for the chance at 2 things that really can. Right, a bounce back Russell Wilson can smash any of these pieces. A good Jeudy can take out probably all of them as well. Right, so I think you're really running a 2-way go with that, where it's really tough to lose this deal in a bad way from the Wilson Jeudy side. And I always try to look at those deals sort of like that. How do I sort of avoid a catastrophic loss? I think it's really hard to lose from the Wilson Jeudy side in a way that really hurts you. I think, being on the other side of this absolutely can, right? A Russell Wilson bounce back, right? And it's correlated with a Jeudy bounce back, right? All of a sudden, like, you can be in a lot of trouble. So I think that's a really good way to go about buying some distressed assets.
Yeah, and I think going after Russell Wilson, something in the back half of round 2, and then you add on one player like a Purdy or a White is an appropriate offer. It may sound egregiously high or low depending on your vantage point, but as profile collectors, that to us that is good process. That is giving up stuff that's unlikely to hurt you. And frankly, if you're sitting there with 208, if you have a pick at 204, let's face it, you're kind of shopping in the same aisle of the store. So sometimes, we've said this before, we'll talk about it at draft time, but sometimes if you have too many picks in the same zone, then you're kind of de-optimizing, because you're going to draft players that maybe you don't want. But, well, they're here, and this is who I should take, where a trade down or even trading like this for a veteran or somebody else, something else is going to be the method to utilize those picks. So if you have a pick earlier in the round, then it may be redundant, and it may be one where, again, I think offering a second and then a quarterback with some semblance of appeal, possibilities in the future, that's a really solid offer, initial foray for Russell Wilson, I think. We got 12-team Superflex again. We've got Leonard Fournette. Going to be interesting. A lot of people writing him off. Chuck's watch. Still under contract for Tampa Bay. Like, I think a lot of people are reading a different newspaper than I am. He's under contract. Rashad White's, yes, they're in a committee. We understand all of this. Tom Brady is probably less likely than Leonard Fournette to be in Tampa Bay if I'm placing bets. Leonard Fournette being traded for a 24-second.
By the way, this week was awesome considering it was like the underpriced, sort of unsexy, really productive profile week, right? Keenan Allen smashing on Monday Night Football, Fournette, right? I mean, heck, Higbee, right? I mean, you can just kind of go with these guys that you couldn't sell. I couldn't get a third for Higbee in season, couldn't get a third for him.
Was it you? Was it you? Did you text me? I thought I read. I can't remember what platform. But
yes,
you were
it
like,
was me. I was like, I don't understand.
No, I know it was you, but I couldn't remember if you had texted me or if it was something
you.
like on the Football Guys staff chat or whatever. But you said like I haven't. What was the phraseology? It was really good because you put your words together, in a very precise way. So
well, I said that that we have him really high at Football Guys, and I just couldn't. It's one of those things I just couldn't stomach, and I was like, that's not the way I want to go down. And I just couldn't. He was playing left tackle for an extended period of time, like during the season. I just couldn't trust him to run enough.
Yeah, the Evan Ingram roll, leak out for 2-yard outs after you chip.
Yeah, I said we like Football Guys this week. I can't stomach playing them. And I had to in a couple of spots. Like I didn't have a choice, but there was a couple of spots that I benched him. I actually don't think it proved. I don't think it proved that it mattered. I think I won the spot where I benched him, and like he would have helped my fantasy points. But I think I ended up winning the week anyways. I don't think it ended up being consequential, but I feel disrespected. I still don't feel great about starting him next week. Like it hasn't made me feel all that much better. I mean, it should.
They should separate tight end production from screens and tight end production in non-screens, and I guarantee Higbee would be tight end 1 if we were doing screens. That could be just his skill set, or it could be he might be just you have such running back like chops with the ball in your hands, or it might be we're just gonna scheme it. We're gonna do it to Bryson Hopkins or anybody in that situation. We're the only people that can talk a dynasty trade with Leonard Fournette and go immediately to Tyler Higbee. Immediately left turn, 3 left turns.
Revered, yes. My question on this trade is: does it go away? Right? Like, does this trade at any point go away? Would be kind of now maybe
for the record I like the value. For the record, I like the value. We can start there.
Sure. The reason you're probably making this trade as we sit here right now is to start him in week 17, and I think that's an added benefit of this. If you're just doing it in sort of resetting your team, I wonder if it goes away. I do think the value's fine. The one thing that you have to be careful about at this time of the year is that I've found, my research has suggested, I found this sort of anecdotally in my own experiences, is you have to be careful about tying up future assets right now, because you don't know in December what August is going to bring, or what February is going to bring, what April might bring, what any of those times might bring, where that second, if it was flexible, if it was liquid, might get you a shot. Just go back and start thinking about other things that have happened. Deshaun Watson, right? Maybe a second would have got Deshaun Watson at some point, right? There was times where Zeke was going through stuff in the offseason where if you threw a second at Zeke, could have got him a lot younger profile when he was there than Fournette is there. Tyreek Hill, right? All of these situations that have happened in the offseason that you don't necessarily want to tie up future assets. Now, if Fournette is going to help you right now, do it. But if you're sort of thinking about, well, I can get sort of out in front of the market and get a discount on Fournette, I don't love doing it at this point of the calendar.
Right. Because you want to maximize, if you're trading picks, you want to maximize the return you're getting with the profiles. If you're aiding your lineup, you mentioned week 17. I actually didn't even think of that angle. Like I was looking at pure macro, and I was thinking of it this way. Like, yes, if you get one clarified start here, I mean, how many expected starts do you typically get out of I would say late second, but when you go 2 years out, a lot more ambiguity. So I hesitate to say that directly, but you're looking for generally in Superflex, maybe there's an underrated quarterback profile, but generally you're looking at hopefully a day 2 running back or something of the injury away to start out ilk that can develop into a starter with that pick. But obviously the liquidity of the pick trade-wise is going to offer you far greater. And you hold. Someone mentioned in the chat, you could have got a second shipped for Amari Cooper, when he headed over to Cleveland. So that's the whole point. I mean, you can find underrated profiles. And so the real question is 28-year-old Leonard Fournette heading into 2023 offseason with a lot of time to go before you really start him again. Is that really the cash out a pick 2 years from now type thing? And the other thing I will ask is if you start trading 24 second, it sounds like one isolated trade. However, does that avalanche into you start trading a lot of future picks because you start chasing? I have to contend. It starts with maybe they already traded away their 24 first, and you say, I have to do everything in my power to make that pick late. That's an okay philosophy. But when you start chasing it with it picks 2 years in advance, I think it's a slippery slope, and you have to be careful, especially if you keep going after the older player with some attachment of the next 6 to 9 month risk.
Right. And you're making a bet, right? What you're worried about is your draft order that's going to be determined 10, 11 months from now. You're trying to make a bet right now about that, right? Which is
we talk about the other side. We talk about buying the hubris teams that might be close to winning a title. They're one of the better teams now, but you look and you're like, they don't have a lot of depth. Maybe they already traded away their picks. I'm getting a pick 2 years from now. I'm just increasing the variance of the negativity that could happen. Or, hey, they've had a year or two of having good injury puck luck. They've had some good fortune. They haven't had some wild scenarios with NFL trades or injuries or what have you. And all of a sudden you get 2 or 3 of those things converging in a season, and you end up, as you said, with Atlanta and with some of these other teams, NFL wise, all of a sudden you end up with a high pick.
Yeah.
We got one more here, 12-team Superflex. And I said that as I make fun of everyone that does that because there's no quarterbacks involved and no picks involved. But here we are. Stephon Diggs and Jerick McKinnon for Jonathan Taylor.
So this is contending for not, right? That's almost certainly what this trade is, right? This team is trading for Jerick McKinnon and Stephon Diggs to start him this week. I tend to be a little cautious on doing that because there's risk in that, right? If Diggs doesn't perform for you and you lose, and then all of a sudden, right, you're way behind, right? But it does have payoff, right? So I sort of, right, there's a if you cash a championship now, right, there's no guarantee that Taylor would ever get you to one. So I sort of get that, right? You sort of have to understand the bet you're making. I think you're getting older at wide receiver. I've sort of I really like the Taylor profile. However, we don't see running backs go back to the well very often at running back 1. Typically the ones that we do have went for enormous running back 1 seasons, right? That wasn't Taylor. And all of a sudden, if he kind of, if they're going to kind of go through it for the next 18 to 24 months, like that, is he going to have the ceiling, or is it going to be a situation where you could replicate him playing, where Josh Jacobs is going to outproduce him at a lot cheaper price, right? So I think a lot about that. You're getting a lot older at receiver, though, is the other concern, although I still think Diggs has some time. I think you have to think through how you feel about those things. I think if I'm probably contending right now and I can meaningfully improve my projected points this week, I'd probably do the deal.
Okay. One other scenario that people don't usually mention, and you didn't, so I will just mention it here, is there are scenarios as well where you acquire players to help you, whether it's 1 week, a month, just a contending team in a current year, that you acquire them. Obviously, the intention is that they will graphically help you. We haven't talked about, a wins over replacement and all those types of things, but there's also a chance that you win the title. Stephon Diggs did not help you. Either of these players did not help you. Whether you put them in your lineup, obviously, I would assume you're starting them. I don't know why you
really
would
dumb not to.
I would wonder why you would pick McKinnon as something you would include in a deal if you weren't going to start him this week per se, because he's a free agent. He's on the older side, the perfect storm season that is coming to an end, dynasty wise for us in lineups. So you put these guys in and you could win, and it wasn't because of them. They were just there. So Taylor obviously is not starting for you, but I think you take Taylor, and here's the reason. I think you're going to have a pretty good window here that Taylor is going to be pretty insulated. Stephon Diggs is not, and I would say I do like the idea generally of trading running back for wide receiver. That's one of the common things I do. You collect a lot of running backs, and then you find opportunities to trade for wide receiver. However, Diggs is at a precarious age that I would not want to trade such a high running back to get him. I think a better idea would be, what if you sat here right now and traded Javonte Williams for Stephon Diggs?
Sure.
So that's the method I would prefer strongly. Taylor is right in the middle of his prime window. I mean, he's hit to such extents with ceiling and with consecutive years. I mean, he's on a track that you're likely to see 2, 3, even more running back one seasons. Like, and whether we can talk about, what's the ceiling? Is he ever going to get back to running back one or things like that? But the point is, he's an insulated profile. He's been there. He's done that. And he's right there in the prime window. That injury is one of the highest levels of why doesn't it work out if it doesn't work out with Taylor over the next 2-3 years. We saw it with Barkley, right? I mean, Barkley got some of his prime years taken away. Stephon Diggs is going to be, again, we love this profile of, hey, I'm just going to get him and I'm just going to start him. I get that. But he is, I think he's 29.x for the offseason and next year. So that's a critical zone that, again, I just, like, for example, Gabe Davis didn't really get up and challenge him. And he's had a really good perfect storm of elite quarterback and not any legit challengers to his role. Not saying he's going to, but just he's had a really good run of durability, situation, and just, going through his later 20s. So I have some pause about doing it this way. I would want a riskier running back profile to be used, or I'd want a little bit younger wide receiver to extend my window, even if they're 27, just a little younger to give me more projected prime year windows.
What if instead of doing this, like, you kind of go the other way, add to Taylor to go up, right? So include another younger piece, include a first, and say in talk to the Jefferson GM, or sort of go that direction. I think sort of as you were talking, that was sort of the other thing that sort of popped into mind. If you are doing this, have you exhausted all your options, right? Is this the last option that you have, the only option that you have? Or do you have other options you just haven't explored yet, right? I would sort of challenge the person thinking about this. Again, I sort of came down on the side of like, I mean, I guess if this is kind of the thing that can push you in that direction, you kind of take, you take it and kind of hope that it helps you type deal. Whereas I think if you sort of said, all right, like, let's make a dynasty trade, we can use the Taylor, aspect of this deal, add to him, and then go get myself, can I, what else do I have to add to Taylor to get Justin Jefferson, right? Is there someone in there that I can, that I can add, right? Do I have a guy like Trey Lance, who maybe I'm not necessarily sold on, but this could be a situation where I could package him up, spin him off, and I could go get myself an absolute star, right? Like, that's the other thing that you could think about doing in sort of, if you're trying to sort of amp yourself up, try to make a dynasty trade where you're adding to Jonathan Taylor. It's not typically the approach people take, but that would be the one that I would think about in this one, because it's making a dynasty trade. And Gabe Davis did hear his name.
There you go.
In the chat.
Nary a show goes by. Do want to close out here with a couple of quotes from the Footballguys Dynasty Forum. This is a really interesting one that I haven't thought about because it's never come up, but I do wonder what the mechanisms are. How do you think playoff ties should be resolved? Fantasy-wise. Have you ever seen a tie?
I got pretty close this week. I'm pretty close on a couple of them. That's a good question. That's a good question. I think if it's a finals, you chop, right? I think that would be you just chop it. There's consequences to that, right? If you've got like a dynasty pot, did someone win it, right? Does these two co-champions have you sort of have to think about that. There's implications for just,
are they both eligible next year for some Empire pot or repeat champion something?
Or are they not, right? Like, how you have to sort of think about
what you just said makes me think that you can't actually have a tie and split it, but
you should think about it this might be the situation where you just think about it in advance, right? Hey, we're having this hypothetical conversation. I wrote a paper in law school about what would happen if there was a natural disaster on election day. And like, then there was actually a natural disaster on election day, and there was like some hurricane stuff, and you were concerned about like, all right, well, what? And everyone thought it was Chicken Little, right? Sort of hypothesizing about a natural disaster happening on election day, until it actually happened. And I was like, hey, now I'm Chicken Little, this situation could happen. Like, let's sort of get out in front of this, right? I was listening to
Well,
a podcast that
the
talked about
mechanism to get out in front of it. The mechanism is having 2 decimal places for scoring.
But you could still tie that, right? That's the
Well,
other thing.
no, I
Like,
know
take
you
the decimal
can,
places
but
out,
what I'm saying
it
is
way
that a lot of
reduces the
people,
odds.
like, especially if you do like the stock, especially I remember when I first started playing fantasy, it was just, there was no decimal places and it was low scoring. I mean, because I think it was non PPR, and you might have scores of like 68 to 61, and your odds with no decimals and low scoring go up immensely for having ties. I think I even played with regular season ties in there in the early odds. And so so I think adding the decimal places, you could also have it so that you have some of them. It really is about thresholds. I still see leagues out there and questions sometimes from, oh, well, once you pass, 80 yards, then you get 8 points for the rushing, yards. And then when you pass 90, you get 9. But when you start going 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, so I would say make sure that it's scored in that fashion. Go heavy decimal places. That will alleviate the possibility in the future. And then I think, I don't know a lot of rules that have this written in. Playoff ties, how is that administered? And I would think you have to have something that's either it defaults to maybe the higher seed ends up winning. Like, that's almost like a home field advantage. I frankly am a fan of home field advantage and feel like the higher seeds or the highest scoring teams in the regular season should have an edge in the playoffs.
Tie goes
should
to
have
the runner
some
type deal.
Yeah. So I think that naturally fits. Or if you want to say, hey, we're going to set it up this way, and it's the highest, maybe it's the highest scoring guy on your bench. Maybe it's the highest scoring guy in your lineup. Just total stud theory. Whatever you set up, but you got to be crystal clear. Because Jordan, if this happened in an actual money league, and it just, and I don't care if it's in the finals. I don't care if it's in the first round. The point is, it's win or go home. It's not week 8, and now you have a tie, and everyone just freezes.
Yeah,
and you look at the rules.
Yeah,
and you look at the rules, and there's nothing.
Nothing there. Yeah,
and honestly, I'm commissioner of a few leagues, and if something comes up and it literally is not in the rules, and I know you have mechanisms where it says commissioner will use best judgment and blah blah blah. There's a lot of ways to go on this round, and there's going to be people on both sides of whatever you say. So
there's not a good answer. I think a couple of things you could sort of fall back to as well. Some stuff that we use. I think that you're trying to get the best team, right? That's pick the team that has the best all play record in the regular season, right?
Or most total points for the season. Yes, something like that is very easy, and I think it's. I don't know about fair. I mean, it's a head-to-head matchup, but you're saying you got all the way to the end, and what do I say? You got to kill the king. So the king was the highest seed. The king was who was the highest seed, the highest scoring team in the regular season, whatever. And you're the underdog or whatever, and you lost. You didn't beat them. You didn't beat them. You didn't come take them down. You're the defending champ until you're eliminated from the playoffs the following year. So same philosophy, I think. Your first thought about the Empire and about the bonuses,
I sort of went
triggers
all the way to the
thing. Like that's one that I wouldn't have thought about at the beginning, and I think that's a really important one, because now you have to have a winner. You can't have 2 teams going for an Empire, or a back-to-back bonus the next year.
Right. The other thing too is like, has anyone won? Right, like I mean, not to get super technical here, but if the rule says that you play the winner of the semifinal game, no one has won that game, right? If they straight push tie, no one's won the game, right? So actually, is that I don't think that's the right answer, but like that might be the actual.
Actually, Jordan, I will point out one more thing. There is one of my leagues that every single week I do it. You have this drop down menu on MFL, and I always find it dopey when I'm selecting somebody. But the tiebreaker mechanism is you select a tie-breaking player, and if you ever tied, it would come down to your tie-breaking player versus theirs. And here's the interesting twist: it's a 2-quarterback league, and every time the player you select is a quarterback. And I find that probably the worst thing to do, because plenty of people, I'm sure, are selecting backup quarterbacks. So that really doesn't help. It should just be any player. You certainly can select a quarterback, and frankly, you probably want to select a quarterback if you had a third viable option, a starter that wasn't in your lineup. But I do think especially in the playoffs, and actually now that I think of it, there's one other league that in a message board you put a tie-breaking player if you're in the playoffs only. So there you go. Those are 2
potential
other
points for the week. Is another one you could use. right?
Yep.
Who had
Total quality for your team, right?
right? Yeah,
What's
who
the
had the
maximum
highest
you can do?
potential points on the
Because the odds of both of those being a tie, you're definitely Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man, and frankly, you're might be the same team. I always
Right.
think it's funny. I don't know if you're in any of these leagues, Jordan, where you're two conferences, and then you come together there's one game every year that's a Super Bowl, and it's between the two teams that win their conference.
Mhm.
So then you have a scenario where you can have 2 or 3 redundant players in lineups. There's actually some strategy involved of like what players are actually mattering here. We're just
Right.
canceling each other out.
Right. Do I want to increase variance or decrease it? You know what I mean? Like you got a
here's,
lot of that
here's,
going on.
here's the one final point too. I see the whole one thing we didn't talk about is chopping the pot. Like proactively, have you ever reached out to chop a pot, or has someone asked you?
I think I did. I don't know if I've ever agreed to one. I've had conversations about it that didn't work out.
I always think
I'm
it's
in the
interesting. The person that reaches out, does that mean that they think they're the underdog? Is that the only reason
yeah.
you would do it?
I did it in a home league where I thought the person like I thought the person could probably use the money, so I said let's chop it. You know, I thought
Yeah.
that was kind of the right thing to do under the circumstances. That I didn't want to be in a spot where, you know, that like the few $100 actually really mattered to him, and he was sort of, you know, living on that danger. One thing that I will do, like I'm in the dynasty. I'm in the staff dynasty championship in our dynasty league, and I think it's me and Adam Harstead, and we're both going on the staff retreat. So I'll probably, you know, ask him. Maybe this will be the form to ask him, but see if we want to just say, hey, well, you know, whatever. We'll sort of spend it on the staff retreat on, you know, whatever dinner or whatever it is, you know, for everyone. I think that'd be pretty fun. So I think it comes from Joe. I think Joe gives us the prize, so we'll just sort of kick it back. That's kind of my thought on that one. So
yeah, I think the one or two times that I've either thought about it or done it a lot of years, a lot of leagues is when I feel that the split between first and second is too much for what I would typically, if I was creating a league, I like one that is generally a little flatter because we know head-to-head variance. And so the quote unquote earning a championship, winning one more game in a head-to-head scenario, to me, it doesn't really, to me, it's not super indicative of I prove that I'm the best. I would say it's not the best methodology of doing that. So to me, when you have a pretty big split of like it can be 3-1, 4-1, 5-1, first to second, like to me, that's too wide. So what I will do is not chop it, but I would be proactive of like, let's just reduce it. Like we're playing for X amount and then we're splitting the rest. We're still playing for something. It's not so. I think that is reasonable, especially if you get to higher, higher dollar leagues. Is that, I mean, I heard of one. I mean, we're talking like difference of like $30,000 in some of, from first to second. It's like, wow, we are really going up there. And so in those scenarios, it's like, we've both done well. We both have gotten here. Or do we want to leave it up to the head-to-head 1 week fantasy gods for this?
Right.
It would. So I do think it's an interesting calculus, though. Like if you were doing betting odds or like, hey, what do we think the split is here? You can go by projections or whatever. But I think it would be interesting if the two players had to come to an agreed upon split. No, we're not doing 50-50. We're going to agree that such and such team is 57-43 or whatever. I think that would be a really interesting thought exercise.
Yeah. Or you say, hey, we're going to split, we'll each take home 40 and play for the other 20. Kind of like you said, shrink the pot.
Shrink it.
The other thing
some
too,
of these,
like
some people really think about the all or none. Like I know guillotine leagues and some other things with this whole winner take all. I don't think even all the big slants of like Yahoo leagues back in the day, I've never played in an all or nothing. Completely like 100% goes to the winner. Second place, you get a set of steak knives.
Right. Yeah. The other thing too is like, I think it matters a bit. Like we play a lot of leagues, fortunately I'm in a decent number of championships this week. So sort of my view on it is it'll kind of balance itself out, right? I'm not living and dying on one league where I'm playing for $25,000 and that's my portfolio for next year, right? Like, it's so I do think there's some of that to it too, right? If the money really matters in terms of your own personal situation or your fantasy, if it's all of your stake for next year and taking a chop, even if it's less, triples or quadruples what your stake is next year, right? That can really impact you. So, I mean, I don't frown on people doing it. I know that I was having some conversations with some subscribers today, and they were like, embrace the variance, do it, just play it out, whatever. And I'm like, I get that, but I think that other people are in other situations, and I don't frown on people for sort of understanding all that.
In this episode, we discussed some profiles, all the ways many of the fantasy players and situations NFL teams have disappointed us this year. Profile of Jonathan Taylor, Leonard Fournette, some future picks, Russell Wilson, and even some older player profiles heading into 2023. I am Chad
75-25 on that trade, by the way. I tweeted it
there
out.
We go.
75% took the Russell Wilson side, 25 took the other side of that trade.
And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues, good luck in your championships, and have a happy and healthy start to 2023.